Am I allowed to do this? This is a question I hear a lot in coaching calls at CGC Academy. Classical music, perhaps more than other styles, not perhaps, definitely more than other styles, brings with it a certain weight of rules, correct technique, interpretation. Am I reading the notes correctly? Did I make a mistake? Mistake is such a big word in the world of classical guitar. One of the things that can be challenging as a teacher is that in the beginning stages of learning classical guitar and music, rules can be extremely helpful. They can help overwhelm. They can clarify times when there's so many potential options, and it could just confuse the student. They build technique through repetition and restricting certain information. Because, of course, if we went, let's say, for example, if we use all sorts of right-hand permutations right from the get-go, that's going to be a little bit messy in terms of establishing good alternation and a reliable right-hand movement. And ultimately, they prevent bad habits. So in the beginning, these rules can be very, very useful. However, I would say that using our grade system, once we get to about grade 3 or 4, you need to start changing your mindset from "is this allowed" to "does this work?" That's a very different question. Is this allowed is a question where you might see a fingering and either you're doing it differently or you want to do it differently, but you see that on the page it says a 2, but you want to use a 3 in your left hand. And should you follow that blindly? Well, if it's a good addition, with the caveat that it's not a typo, then at grade 1, grade 2, so the first year or so of your learning, you should follow that. It probably is, even though it's generic fingering, the music, it simplifies what you're doing. It's probably not the thing you need to be focusing on at that point in time. However, once you get to that lower intermediate or late beginner stage, I would say if you have the instinct to try a different finger in the left hand, so you're changing the fingering, the question is not, am I allowed to do it? It's, does this work? Because you will bring with that a deeper knowledge of what's going on the fingerboard at that point in time, because you're kind of chewing through the moment and figuring out the best fingering. So you actually get to sink your teeth into the music a bit more. You need to be a little bit critical of, if you change it, is it better and why? Or sometimes it's much of a muchness. So for example, if you just have one note that doesn't change, you could use a variety of fingers and it wouldn't really make much difference. It often depends on where you're going and where you came from. So the transition from place to place on the fingerboard, that will inform your choices. And then when it comes to musical interpretation, that's an interesting one, especially with adult learners, because adult learners have had a lifetime of experiencing music. So even though you might be an intermediate classical guitarist, you're probably quite an advanced listener. Especially if you've been listening to classical guitar music or classical music for a long time, you've absorbed a lot of that language, that musical language, the phrasing, the shaping, the timing, the dynamics. And so if you want to try something, I would say that your musical instincts are probably more developed than you give them credit for. So yes, try a different phrasing, try different tone colors, try different dynamics. But the key with all of it is to not do it just for the sake of doing it, just to say, oh, I don't like this edition, I disagree. It's more about saying, how can I make this music expressive in the way that I want it to be? If you want, like a really simple example is, so I'm playing A, B, C. I'm starting down in first position. Simply put, if I play that up on the 4th string, we get vibrato on every note as a possibility. We get a very different tone world. I can play with the thumb. All of these musical possibilities open up because of that change. And so if that's your musical intention, if you have that idea, go for it. Absolutely go for it. I find that sometimes students can be a little bit combative when it comes to the stipulations of a teacher or an edition. And I will tell you, as someone who's worked on a lot of classical guitar editions by now, you can either choose one of two routes. You can either leave the score without many fingerings or indications from the editor, leaving options open, in which you will receive emails saying, what's the point of this edition? You didn't add any fingerings. Or you could add a lot of fingering indicating your musical choices on that edition, which then will annoy some intermediate to advanced players who want to make those decisions for themselves. Point is, there is no perfect answer to creating an edition. As a general rule, the more advanced pieces get, the less fingerings you add in as in the edition, unless it's for a pedagogical reason, which a lot of mine are. But there are many situations where I've added in fingerings and there is another valid option. And I almost get kind of a combative experience where a student says, I really disagree with this and I want to do it this way. And I'm always saying, great, there's nothing draconian in the fingering approach of an edition. I would say, in contradiction to what I just said, you might find examples of the great Andres Segovia defending his editions passionately to the point of throwing students out of a masterclass. But in my case, I'm absolutely not like that. I think it's part of the artistic process to experiment. And the final part is perhaps the most important, which people often don't think about. It's not deciding the edition isn't good enough. It's not coming up with your alternative version. It's using your musical judgment to decide, does it work? That's the question. Does this work? This musical idea. I know I've sort of talked about fingering a lot, but it could be also a different dynamic. It could be phrasing. It could be repeating a passage or not repeating a passage. It could be tempo choices. That's a big one. Tempo choices. I often get a lot of students wanting an exact tempo marking for a particular piece of music. And I do understand it in a pedagogical way, at a learning stage, especially in the beginner's experience, it's good to have a tempo to work towards. However, when it comes to music and just music working as an artistic expression, pieces work in a range of tempos. I think at a certain point, slow is too slow, and at a certain point, fast is too fast. But within any given piece, it doesn't have to be an exact BPM. You've got a sort of a gradient. Some have a more specific character than others, like dance pieces, perhaps. But that's an artistic choice in the end, your tempo selection. So even though the classical guitar world and the classical music world in general has a little bit of an oppressive, rule-driven culture, I do invite you, and I invite all of the students at Classical Guitar Corner, to start adapting that question of, is this allowed, from about grade 3 onwards, to does this work? Because ultimately, as a well-formed artist, it's about making choices. And those choices make your interpretation individual, make your expression individual, and it's why we listen to the same pieces over and over again in the hands of different performers, because we're intrigued to hear the music interpreted from the composer through to the score, through to the performer, through to the listener. That chain of interpretation is a beautiful one. Sometimes it started centuries ago. And it is a wondrous thing why we listen to the same pieces over and over and over again. But it really is, I think, to do with the interpretation process. It's really intriguing. It's really intriguing. So that's my thoughts on this matter. I'm curious to know yours. If you find classical music, as one of the core criticisms is, they say if you want to squash the creativity, just put someone in music school. But it's not. Yeah, it's up to you ultimately to liberate yourself from this, because taking all of those things into account, that the rigidity of scores, the finite nature of fingering, and the intentions of the composer is something to consider as well. Sometimes composers really do want you to do what they've expressed. It's a nice segue, actually. I'm going to perform in this podcast a study that I wrote, study number 13. I would say it's probably the study that seems to have resonated with this most amount of people. It's an interesting one for me because, as an aside, one of the big challenges as I compose music for the grade curriculum in CGC is to make sure the music stays, like, I get excited about musical ideas that I have, but then I have to keep it at a certain grade level. So I restrict certain things. It might be a mechanical thing like a slur, or just the complexity of the left-hand fingering or right-hand fingering. In this case, this study takes all of the musical and technical concepts that were presented in grade 2, which is quite an early grade, and brings them together in one piece. Now, there's two things to say, because you're going to hear this piece and you're going to go, that's a grade 2 piece? I don't think so. So there's two things to say. One is that in isolation, every moment of this piece fits within the grade 2 difficulty level. However, it is long. And so that duration lends itself to, it brings a challenge in itself. Also, when I perform it, it's going to be a bit more florid, a bit more flowing, and a bit faster. But as I said, the tempo range for this piece, as with every piece, is very large, actually. Not that every piece has a large tempo range, this one does. So you can play the arpeggios much slower than I do, and they'll still be effective. And the other big point, which I know from my experience, but you wouldn't know as an individual, is that working with adult students, we've got two buckets, very generally speaking. One bucket is the beginner musician who has been a novice up to this point, has gone through the curriculum and hasn't really done anything before. That's less common than the second bucket, where people come to Classical Guitar Corner Academy, they've played music in the past, maybe even another instrument to a great level of proficiency. Or maybe they played classical guitar to a high level, had a break for 1 or 2 or 3 decades, and then came back. And so they bring a whole swath of skill sets that is a little bit beyond grade 2. And so that's also what this piece serves, is that robust learner who, a longer piece and this many different techniques, albeit attainable in grade 2, strung together makes that more challenging. I've come across a lot of grade 2 players in the curriculum who really enjoy this piece and find it manageable. It's a long preface to it. So here it is, study number 13. So did you count all the different techniques that were in there? We got arpeggios, PIMA, AMIP. We had a little cadenza. There was articulation, staccato. There was phrasing. It's easier to see on the score than hear it perhaps. Thumb work. There was some block chords. All of these things are taught in the grade 2 curriculum, and I tried to bring them together in a musical context here. So thank you for your time and attention, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.